So I've had a odd morning, but not one that's uncommon to me, chasing a proverbial rabbit down a hole in order to put together a Boruto theory. See, a couple of days ago, I received an email of somebody taking a screenshot of a post on Reddit, something that happens to me a fair amount. But this post was different, not only because it was filled with as much hate and vitriol as I've seen in a Reddit post in a long time, but also because this post contained a legitimately good theory. See, the post that was sent to me over this email was posted by a user by the name of Borosumi. And for those of you who aren't able to deduce what that name might mean, it's Boruto X Sumire. And thus you can imagine what somebody with the username Borosumi on Reddit would dedicate the majority of their Reddit presence to. Did you guess that it would be being the #1 Sumire fan on the entire internet? You didn't? You probably should have, because every character needs a #1 fan, and apparently, this is Sumire's. Now, outside of the fact that it's borderline unbelievable that Sumire has a #1 dedicated fan, it's even further unbelievable that that person actually makes some really good theories. See, because this post that was sent to me, while short and filled with anger about Boruto and Sarada possibly ending up together one day, did bring up a very legitimate and key point that nobody has been talking about in the Boruto fandom, and something that could have massive repercussions for not only the love triangle between Boruto, Sarada, and Sumire, but also for just the plot of Two Blue Vortex. See, this post mostly revolved around the community's reception to Chapter 5 and 6 of Two Blue Vortex. And for those of you who don't remember Chapter 5 and 6 of Two Blue Vortex, basically the chapters revolved around Boruto coming back to Konoha and talking with Sarada and Sumire. This is when he got his big hug from Sarada, and Sumire just kind of stood there. But because the entire fandom was so jazzed about the possibility of Boruto and Sarada ending up together, and so jazzed about making fun of people who wanted Boruto and Sumire to get together, that we did, as a fandom, kind of blow past the fact that it was weird that Boruto teleported to them. See, because while there is a myriad of different ways that Boruto could know that both Sarada and Sumire were unaffected by omnipotence, we've never necessarily become privy to any of those possible explanations. Because, well, yes, of course, we the readers know that Sarada and Sumire still think Boruto's a good guy. There isn't necessarily any confirmed reason for Boruto to know that. And thus, in this post, Borosumi brings up the fairly decent point that there's a possibility the reason Boruto understands that Sarada and Sumire are still on his side is because of Nue, as both Sumire and possibly Boruto have the ability to summon Nue. But when I say that, a lot of you are probably scratching your head, because so far as you remember, Boruto doesn't have the ability to summon Nue. But he kind of does. In this realization, an impossible communication link between Boruto and Sumire could not only have massive repercussions for the possibility of Boruto and Sumire ending up together one day, but also, much more importantly, possible repercussions for the plot of Two Blue Vortex, as we're currently reeling towards a reality where even Sarada is no longer in Konoha, which would make Sumire and Sumire alone a possible connection of communication in Konoha. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're talking Borosumi still alive. That's actually not going to be the title. I just couldn't think of anything more clever. But before we get into all that, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me doing deep dives about your favorite anime and manga on Reddit, then go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. And if you guys want to see me trying to recreate some of your favorite anime and manga live, go ahead and follow my brand new page, Anime IRL, where we're taking real-life challenge content to the anime world. Or if you just want to hear me talk about anime and manga every single week, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happens in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But before we get into all that, today we're going to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Upside. Upside is a free app that gets you daily cash back in all the necessities, like gas, groceries, and dining. Upside has over 100,000 restaurants, grocery stores, and gas stations on its app, all available to get you cash back. And yes, it's real cash back. No confusing points or reward system, just actual cash back in your wallet every time you make a purchase at a store with Upside. But how much cash are we talking here? Well, frequent Upside users earn an average of $340 per year. And listen, as somebody who's been using Upside at my local grocery store for over a year now, I'm using the money I've earned on Upside to buy more anime plastic. But hey, it's the money I'm earning by using Upside. I can spend it however I want. And since I'm going to be buying food at grocery stores and restaurants anyways, earning money back while doing that is a huge blessing. So if you want to see just how much further Upside can help your dollar go, find out how much you could earn on Upside by clicking the link in my description. To download Upside and use my promo code NCHammer to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon in your first tank of gas you buy in collaboration with Upside. Next, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, then pay as usual with a credit or debit card. Follow the steps in the app, and boom, you're getting paid. And top Upside earners are making as much as $300 a month. And this is backed up by the fact that $1 million in cash is being given back to the users of Upside every single week. So if you eat at Chipotle, Papa John's, Dairy Queen, Domino's, Marco's Pizza, Arby's, Checkers, KFC, Popeyes, Rally's, Taco Bell, Primonta Bros, Wendy's, and more, or get gas at Phillips 66, Shell, Valero, Circle K, Marathon, Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, TA, 7-Eleven, Love's, BP, Casey's, Sunoco, and more, it's about time you start earning some money. So follow the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen right now and get to earning. So in order to make you aware of just how much vitriol was in this Reddit post, I want to read for you, word for word, the first paragraph of this 3-paragraphed post. I don't understand why no one is talking about Sumere's reaction in chapter 6. Why is our fandom so into these shipping wars that instead of using the context of various chapters in a calculative and realistic way, our fandom is using the context to push their agendas? Did none of you wonder why Sumere was acting so strangely when she saw Boruto? Is Sumere got cut the only thing that came to you people's minds? That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the post of somebody who's definitely not upset about the fact that Sarada got the hug and Sumere didn't. But unfortunately, the next 2 paragraphs of this post do make a fair amount of sense. So let's get directly into it. So the majority of this theory is contingent on the events at the end of Chapter 5 of Two Blue Vortex and the beginning of Chapter 6. To get even more specific than that, the theory is contingent around when Boruto uses Flying Raijin to pop in behind Sarada and Sumere. We're having a conversation about how Amado had been able to use physical evidence in Kawaki's karma marking to realize that his memories had been altered. Now, the very fact that Sarada and Sumere were talking about omnipotence could have been the proof that Boruto needed to realize that Sarada and Sumere weren't affected by omnipotence, but that's a bit shallow. See, of course, well, yes, it's absolutely a possibility that Boruto was just like, I'm gonna go check in on Sarada and Sumere and pop behind them at the perfect time while they were revealing to him basically that they weren't affected by omnipotence. That seems like a dumb, lucky thing to happen. Now, well, yes, you could continue that argument by saying that while Boruto was in Konoha, he wanted to make sure that he apologized to Sarada about what happened with Sasuke. But if you take even one step backwards from that opinion, you'll remember that the reason that Sasuke was with Boruto in the first place is because Sarada sent him that way. And thus Boruto should have always been aware that Sarada was unaffected by omnipotence. But the same can't necessarily be said for Sumere. See, so far as we know, there's really no reason for Boruto to know that Sumere isn't affected by omnipotence. Even if you were to go with the line of thinking that there's a toad in the Hokage's office and Sarada's always kicking down the door of Shikamaru's office and yelling about how innocent Boruto is, so far as we've seen, Sumere hasn't been present for any of those talks. And while, once again, you can make the argument that Boruto was just going to talk to Sarada and he wasn't intimidated by Sumere even if she was going to try and run off somewhere, and thus, while popping down to check in on Sarada, who he knew was unaffected by omnipotence, he also happened to hear their conversation talking about how Sumere was also unaffected by omnipotence. But it is undeniable that in the mid part of Chapter 6, that Sumere isn't treating Boruto like she's affected by omnipotence, and Boruto isn't treating her with any suspicion whatsoever. The meeting between the two of them is cordial. Sumere says it's been 3 years, and he says, yeah, you look well. I'm happy to see that both of you are healthy. Sumere then continues on by saying, are you sure you should linger here or it's dangerous? And Boruto proceeds to info dump to Sarada about Sasuke's fate. Now, objectively, this interaction between Boruto and Sumere is a bit odd. Neither Boruto nor Sumere bring up the fact that Boruto might have killed the Hokage, and thus they are both operating under the assumption that neither of them is affected by omnipotence, and therefore they know the truth of the actual reality of the world. So how, outside of the couple of other ways that we've already laid out, could Boruto and Sumere know that each other weren't affected by omnipotence and that Boruto was innocent? Well, Borosumi believes that it has to do with Nue, in the fact that both Boruto and Sumere have been shown summoning Nue. But some of you may not remember the fact that Boruto has summoned Nue, and genuinely, I can't fault you for that, as after all, it's only shown in the anime. Now, technically, Sumere's backstory, which is introduced in the beginning of Boruto, is novelized. So while it is technically anime only, it also is canon. It's a light novel adaptation, which means it's as canon as the manga. So what exactly happens? Well, in episode 4 of the Boruto anime, everybody is still in the Shinobi Academy. And this is the episode where Sumere is introduced. And thus in this episode, the boys are pitted against the girls in a capture the flag mission, where they basically have to compete against each other to reach the flag at the top of the Shinobi Academy. Now, in the beginning of the episode, Konohamaru is showing off to everybody basically that he's able to summon toads. And he's doing this while wearing the contract scroll on his back. Now, Boruto, jealous of the fact that Konohamaru is able to summon a giant toad and get the attention of all the girls of his class, steals this scroll from Konohamaru, which we should have known was the first indication that Konohamaru had not grown in strength at all since his early days in Naruto. How you gonna let a 12-year-old non-genin steal a scroll from you? But anyways, for the rest of the episode, while the girls and the guys are battling it out to see who can capture the flag, eventually as the girls are about to retrieve the flag, Boruto in a last-ditch effort uses summoning jutsu. However, because Boruto hasn't written his name in the scroll and also hasn't made a contract with any animals, the summoning jutsu doesn't necessarily work in the way that Boruto anticipated. Now, in the beginning of the episode, Shino does say when Boruto tries to use summoning jutsu in the beginning of the episode that it didn't work because Boruto hasn't written his name in the scroll and hasn't made a contract with a summoning animal. Now we know with a plethora of evidence that you don't necessarily have to have a contract with a summoning animal to summon them. Naruto was able to summon Gamabunto without having a contract with him by tapping into Kurama's power. Jiraiya was able to reverse summon himself to Mount Muumbuko without having a contract with the Toads by just trying to use summoning jutsu without having a contract. And we don't necessarily know if the rest of the summons in the Naruto universe align themselves with summoning contracts like the Toads and the Snakes do, though it is more likely than not that they do. We just don't have the time to see the contract talk between summoners and the summonees every single time. But still, there is evidence to show that summoning can happen without a contract. And thus, when Boruto in his last-ditch effort at the end of the episode tries to summon a summoning animal without a contract, he ends up summoning Nue. And believe it or not, why he's able to do that is never explained, but there is obviously theories. See, when Boruto is going through the act of using the summoning jutsu, we see the symbol on Sumere's back, the seal that keeps Nue inside of her, flash up on screen and illuminate itself in a purple light. Now, after this, obviously, Nue is summoned into Konoha, and Konohamaru has to beat it back with a Rasengan. And it's after this moment that Nue begins to feed on the negative emotions of people around Konoha, and the Nue/Sumere arc begins. But in that moment, Boruto summoned Nue, not Sumere, and without a contract. And while we don't necessarily have an answer to how he was able to do this, it's undeniable that in episode 13, the Jogan had a connection with Nue. That is to say that in episode 13, Boruto activates his Jogan and stops Mitsuki and Sumere from battling against each other. And after he stops both of their arms from delivering fatal blows to each other, his Jogan begins to create lightning, and that lightning grows out in a circle around him, Mitsuki, and Sumere, and takes them to what is eventually known to be Nue's home dimension. But the power of Boruto's Jogan doesn't just stop there, as it also teleports Nue, who's currently being restrained by Konoha's forces, back to Nue's home dimension. Now, this is rather interesting, because Nue has its own pocket dimension, a pocket dimension that Sumere and her father referred to as the Underworld, which means that Boruto's Jogan almost impulsively and without any action from Boruto teleported himself, Sumere, Mitsuki, and a giant creature to a separate dimension, a dimension that Jogan somewhat weirdly knew how to teleport them to without input, implying that there might be some kind of connection between Boruto's Jogan and Nue, which makes some people theorize that Boruto's Jogan and Nue's homeworld, also known as the Underworld, have some kind of connection that we're not fully aware of yet. Because while Sumere is a somewhat important character in Boruto, committing an entire arc simply to the concept of her introduction seems kind of worthless when you consider what her character's panned out to be thus far in Boruto and Two Blue Vortex. Sure, she works for Amado. Sure, she's leaking information about what Amado's doing to other people. Sure, she's unaffected by omnipotence. Sure, she's a potential love interest for Boruto, but committing an entire arc to her and her father's connection to Danzo just doesn't seem worth it when you consider what Sumere's panned out to be. Unless you take a couple of key contextual points about what Sumere's possible role in Two Blue Vortex could be, which, if you interpret those contextual hints in the right way, could point you toward the fact that Sumere is already more important than we realize, or is going to be more important down the line, and her importance might come from her connection with Nue, whether that be using Nue as a communication device with Boruto, or allowing Boruto to summon Nue as a possible ally down the line. But this isn't the only way that it could be explained away that Boruto was able to summon Nue on top of the Shinobi Academy that one fateful day, as a somewhat simpler explanation would be that Boruto summoned Nue because Sumere was present while he was trying to use a summoning jutsu without a contract or a summoning animal. See, the reason you're not supposed to use a summoning jutsu without a contract with an animal is because sometimes you might summon something and you have no control over what you're summoning. And thus, if you dump enough chakra into a summoning jutsu with no contracts, you might end up with Manda in front of you and Nobody wants that. And thus I do believe a slightly more sound explanation of how Boruto ended up summoning Nue on top of the Shinobi Academy that day was because his summoning jutsu interfered with the power of the Gezo Tenno, which is the seal on Sumere's back. And thus because Sumere, who at that moment was walking around with a summoning seal for Nue inscribed onto her back, was present for Boruto's contractless summoning jutsu, that her summoning jutsu completed his summoning jutsu and thus Nue was summoned. But we still can't ignore the fact that Boruto was able to, through the power of his Jogan, enter Nue's space-time pocket dimension. And if Naruto has taught us anything, pocket dimensions are not only pretty common, but also usually individual. See, while Obito is able to link his Kamui to Kaguya's Yamotsu Hirasaka, and therefore follow her through her space-time ninjutsu jumps into different dimensions, usually any kind of space-time ninjutsu that allows for you to travel between dimensions is specific to the individual. This is why Kawaki has the Daikokuten that only he can access, why Obito had the Kamui dimension which only he could access, and why Kaguya had her dimensions that only she could access unless somebody hitched a ride using Kamui. And thus it's not crazy for us to assume that what appears to be Nue's homeworld is just Nue's pocket dimension. And thus Boruto being able to access that pocket dimension with no input and also not by following Nue might prove that the Jogan and Nue have a connection. And it's important for this theory to move forward with that ideology. Because if Boruto was truly only able to summon Nue on account of the fact that Sumere was standing right next to him, then this theory's dead in the water. However, if it's because he has a connection with Nue, then this theory can keep on going. And thus, since so far as we know, Boruto hasn't made any summoning contracts yet, there's a possibility he made summoning contracts with some of Kashin Koji's toads, but we don't know. Assuming that Boruto either hasn't made a summoning contract with any other summoning animals, or in his exchange with Nue happened to make some kind of summoning contract with Nue, then that could possibly explain why Boruto was aware of the fact that Sumere was unaffected by omnipotence. Because while the pocket dimension that Nue lived in seemed to be crumbling when the Gozu Tenno was being destroyed on Sumere's back, Sumere was able to save part of the seal, which is why she still has a connection with Nue, and thus this pocket dimension is believed to still exist. If Boruto, either through the power of the Jogan or just through the power of summoning, is able to either enter the remnants of this pocket dimension or just summon Nue, then yes, there is a legitimate chance that Sumere and Boruto could have used Nue to communicate over the space of the time skip. But I don't think they did. See, the theory is objectively clouded by a bit of bias, and it ignores a lot of key how, when, and why questions. See, we've already laid out and I'm not gonna say the word Miri, you know what I'm saying, because in the last video I posted, everyone was like, oh, Nick says it every single video. It's a good word! But we've already laid out a bunch. Yeah, we'll use a bunch. That's a fun word. No one's learning English today, I guess. Of realistic ways that Boruto could have become aware that Sumere was, in fact, not affected by omnipotence. I mean, after all, Kashin Koji has very actively been spying on Konoha, and Boruto has been with Kashin Koji for at least the last 2 years. Boruto may or may not have the ability to peek into the future based off Momoshiki's abilities, and therefore could have known how this meeting with Sumere and Sarada was going to go down, and a couple of other more logical explanations than Boruto has been summoning Nue to communicate with Sumere. Because if this was the circumstance, wouldn't have Boruto and Sumere known more about what was going on in each other's respective situations? Wouldn't Boruto have told Sumere about the incoming threat of the Claw Grimes? Wouldn't have Sumere told Boruto about the fact that Shikamaru is now the 8th Hokage? And so much else. And if we were to go with this line of thinking, that means that at some point Boruto would have summoned Nue, possibly accidentally again, and then given a message to Nue to give to Sumere because somehow he already knew that she was unaffected by omnipotence. There's just a lot of assumptions that you have to make in order for this theory to make really any sense. When in actuality, the reason that Boruto probably popped on down to talk to Sarada in chapter 5 and chapter 6 is because he knew she was unaffected by omnipotence, and therefore if she was unaffected by omnipotence, she probably told Sumere that Boruto's not a bad guy. See, Boruto may not even be fully aware that Sumere is unaffected by omnipotence. After all, it's never talked about between the two of them. So Boruto might have just been going to talk to Sarada, who he knew is unaffected, and just hope that Sumere would be chill, which she was. And honestly, I wanted to believe in this theory, and I do still believe that this theory could pan out, possibly in the future. Because I'm not saying that there isn't a possibility that Boruto and Sumere couldn't communicate through the medium of Nue. What I'm saying is, it hasn't happened yet. See, if we take the events of what's currently happening in 2 Blue Vortex, we'll know that Boruto's scooped up Himawari after she lost in her battle against Jura, and is currently kind of entering into combat against Hidari after Sarada basically lost. Now, I don't believe that the final battle against Hidari or Jura is at foot, and thus I believe that in some way or another, Sarada, Himawari, and Boruto are gonna go off somewhere together and train, because both Himawari and Sarada, who are being targeted by the Shinju, need massive power-ups. Power-ups that could only really be provided by training with Boruto, Kashin Koji, and possibly Orochimaru. However, if Sarada and Himawari Sumire were to abscond with Boruto, that would make them traitors, and thus the only person who would be left in Konoha with any allegiances to Boruto whatsoever would be Sumire. I mean, Shikamaru would be around, but communicating with Shikamaru is tricky because Ino needs to be there and there's a limited range. And thus Boruto, Sarada, Himawari, Kashinkoji, Orochimaru, and possibly Kakashi would need a mole in Konoha to let them know what's happening. A mole with unlimited communication range. And thus if Boruto is able to use his Jogan ability to pop into Nue's pocket dimension again, Sumire and Boruto could communicate there, or through the medium of Nue. And thus I do believe that this theory has legitimate legs, at least for the future of Boruto. Just not for the past, because as more people turn to Team Boruto, the offensive effort against Boruto from Konoha is only going to get mounted higher and higher, and thus reconnaissance and spying is going to be necessary from Sumire, which I believe will be her role moving forward in Boruto, because it's a role that she's already filled as Amado's assistant, a role she took very explicitly only to spy on Amado. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you believe Boruto summoning Nue was a fluke, something to not be reproduced, or do you think it's something we could see again in the future? Tell me in the comments below, and while it goes down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Sumire having to stay in Konoha while Boruto and Sarada go have a little training arc in a dark, damp cave somewhere. Brutal for Boruto x Sumire shippers.